Hi, everyone. It's now almost 4 p.m. on Tuesday evening. Hoping some of you are able to join in. Um, Maybe I'll just wait for 30 seconds as people are hopefully logging in, and then we'll quickly get started. And as we get started, just a few things. I would try and make it as interactive as I can. So do feel free to send me comments in the chat or in the comments, live comment section. I will try and pick up as many comments or questions I can. And just in case I'm not able to address all of them, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I will be very happy to interact and engage to answer any pending queries. All right, then. So let's get started. I think, the whole definition of BC and AD for me has been redefined because now BC really stands for before COVID and AD really stands for after the death of COVID. And today what we're going to cover is how does this really impact you and me, not just from a health perspective, because I think health is primary and there's a lot which is being discussed about that in different platforms. But we're going to focus on the whole economic scenario and how it impacts you and me from a job perspective. What does it mean for our careers? What does it mean for employment? There's already a lot being spoken about it. Whether you look at Economic Times or you look at any of these business forums. But I feel personally, for me, a lot of these answers have, not solved all the questions that I had. So in some ways, I've been reflective over the last few weeks, and I'm going to bring forward a few thoughts basis that. So I think when I think about COVID, the one thing that comes to my mind is a beautiful quote, which I read somewhere, which essentially says, trust the wait, embrace the uncertainty, enjoy the whole beauty of becoming something else. And when nothing is certain, which means anything is possible. So I think this whole journey about what is possible, what will happen, needs to be simply looked at from a lens of optimism. And I think very often what we do get perturbed by is the uncertainty around what will happen, then thinking through what could bring about a lot more certainty in our life. I think when I think of the whole COVID situation again, I mean, it's a time to make some bold choices about ourselves, about what we want to do in life, personally and professionally. It's time to build our own character because we have to have real conviction in these choices. A lot of what is going on has never happened before. So if somebody is telling you they have an answer, they don't. Nobody has experienced this before. And it's also having the conviction in, what you want to do. Because without that conviction, any choice will be tentative, which means by default it would fail. For me, I think, having spent 26 years in the corporate world, I've seen two, I would say, economic or financial crisis on my own, and which had the same eerie feeling. One was the dot-com bust. I happened to be in Asia, and as you know, Asia was impacted in some way during the dot-com bust. And then there was, of course, the global financial crisis. I'll probably dwell on it a little more. Dot-com bust, I was a lot more junior. I was working with Citibank at that point of time. And when dot-com happened, a lot of organizations had invested their time, effort, money on trying to leverage how internet can become the new horizon of the future. And then the whole bubble burst happened, which meant there were restructurings, there were redundancy, there were job losses, there were all kind of issues which kind of started to come about. And, as that unfolded, some of us who were junior to mid-level employees at that point of time held on to what we believed was required to stay relevant, which means getting into the right jobs, making sure I was skilled properly, and navigating an organizational dynamic, knowing, okay, well, this business is going to go bust, so what do I need to do to make a timely move? Global financial crisis was a little more interesting for me because I happened to be part of investment banking in London, which was one of the worst hit during the GFC crisis. And, I kid you not, once I remember that I was going up the elevator and somebody told me, we should buy the stock of the company that I was working with because it was trading at about $20, and usually the stock was at $40, and everybody said it's a good buy. So I went up to my desk and I opened my computer and picked up the Bloomberg screen. We were in a downfall. We went from 20 to 15 to 10, and we were a penny stock. So honestly, that feeling was extremely surreal when you work for a company and the market cap, whatever may be the factors. Today it was COVID, and that time it was the credit crisis, has boiled down from 120 billion to 10 billion. It's like anybody could buy you out. And we were ready with our pink slips and brown boxes to leave, not knowing where the next day, the employment would come from. So I think for me, I've been, very close to the edge where restructurings happen. And then, I've always felt that when you're going through that dark tunnel, you just keep going and you hope there will be light at the end of it. And I think when you hope and you will it, it tends to happen. So I don't want to be philosophical about it. I was just sharing a personal experience about what has really happened, in my own lifetime whilst dealing with this crisis. I think when I look at the current crisis, it's really a crisis which is health related. And in this context, it is the duty of health, political, societal, and business leaders to navigate through this crisis. This is a very complex interplay of epidemic progression, medical response, what the government will do. Different sectors are impacted differently. I mean, if you look at the tech sector, it's very different than the health sector. But one thing is very clear, it has impacted everyone in some way. And when I look at the impact of this economically, and there's a lot of debate, whether you look at big fours or you talk to the banks, that what would economic scenarios look like? Will it be a rapid recovery, which will be a V shape, which is becoming a distant memory? Will it be a slow comeback, like a U shape, which optimists like me yet hold on to? Or would it be protracted challenge, which is becoming more and more of a reality scenario, which is more L-shaped? So the question is it V, is it U, is it L? And it will also depend, I think, what the shape of economic scenario would be will also depend on which geography has taken swift actions. So, India, for one, I do believe we took a very swift action. It's been painful, but it was the right thing to do. So you would hope, because of the trouble that we've gone through and we've contained or flattened the curve, the recovery will be faster. Having said that, and I speak or share my experience on some of the boards that I sit on, business impact is severely impacted because of the demand shocks or the consumer confidence or the shutdowns or the supply chain disruptions that all of them are facing. And consumer behaviors have changed dramatically. Whether you look at the travel sector, hospitality sector, people want to save money right now because they don't know what it will be required for. So all discretionary spend has been put on hold. I mean, you are fortunate to be in an insurance industry. I'm assuming that a lot of people who logged in are from, are associated in some ways with Future Generali. So it's a fortunate place to be in. But a lot of other sectors are, really reinventing themselves. The sectors like healthcare, food, or household have seen limited impact, but retail or fashion are completely out of sync. If you look at in this scenario, what will be the response of business leaders? I think they'll have to respond very differently because a lot of them don't know what will be next. So it's a trial and error about what will work, how do they plan the demand curves, how do they plan the cost-effective scenario, and so forth, so on. Now, the reason why I have gone from a bit of a macro to a bit of a micro is because this will start to gradually impact what we do in the organization as far as jobs, employee retention, employee engagement, on all of the good things are concerned. And that's the bit which will impact you and I. If you look at some of the forecasts which are coming in from India, and I read some time back that, IMF predicted that India will grow only by 1.9%. Well, that's better than a lot of other Western markets which are contracting. But Goldman Sachs report says we will be flat. Now, the implication it has for workplaces is that we will have to contain the cost. If there is no revenue growth, there is no profitability growth. And hence, organizations may shrink to sustain themselves. How does this translate into what is likely to happen is, my prediction is that in a quarter three or quarter four, we would see more restructurings in the market, unfortunately. But it's kind of coming because just the cost economic ratios won't work out. We've seen the Supreme Court judgment for now, which mandates that most employers have to pay full wages and not terminate employees. Nobody is right now going into any restructuring. But the reality is that the financial coffers will dry up. And so the predictive scenario, if you look at most of the reports, are saying quarter four is when the market will shrink in terms of jobs. It is inevitable. It is coming. And, it will all depend on which product in your industry, which role in your industry is aligned to what the future or next normal looks like. I'm not a researcher, but I'm just crystal gazing with you. The new normal certainly means that we will have more remote working from home, which means real estate and commercial estates will be heavily hit. We've seen an announcement from TCS, their CEO, who said, I don't need more than 25% of my workforce back. Now that's a 350,000 organization. So that'll have implications. What is the downstream implications? If employees are not in office, you don't need a whole lot of infrastructure to support employees, or you need a different way of managing those employees. So how's that going to happen? The way you organize your work, whether you do part remotely, part in office, will have to be reorganized. So what's going to happen in the future is these dynamics will play into some of the jobs which exist today, which will become, by the nature of the jobs, will become redundant. And for a minute, I'm going to separate jobs and I am going to separate employees or individuals. Jobs may become redundant, but in my experience, what's happened in the past is when we were doing big organizational restructuring, we look at people in those jobs and we look at where can we redeploy them, what is their potential, what has been their past experience, what kind of assignments that they have done, can we reskill them and put them somewhere else. So I think that becomes a very important point. And one of my key recommendations for anybody at this point of time who is in the stratosphere feeling a little nervous is reskill, rebuild yourself. And going back to the marketing principles, which most of you are aware of, I'm not going to pick up 7 P's or 8 P's, I'm just going to pick up 4 P's, is trying to look at who are you and what is your value add to the organization you're working for today. And you have to reassess for yourself, will this value add exist in the future? And that's a really important one. It's much better that you do it now when there is no stress, no pressure of restructuring. It will hold you in good stead. So for example, if you're a finance person or you're a marketing person and you're doing a certain set of activities or projects, you need to think through in quarter four, if the business strategy will be quite different, what kind of marketing do I really need to do? Because you might be buying marketing on TV or on other platforms, which may not be as attractive anymore. That is if you have any marketing budget left, of course. But if you do, you need to think about how will you do this more online? How will you do this in a slightly different way? Similarly, from a financial model, there are cost pressures, and there will be immense cost pressures this year. But to kind of work it out in a productive way, how do we not take a short-term call? How do we take a mid to long-term call, depending on how much you can stand out? From an HR point of view, I'm an HR person. I'm talking to a lot of HR heads where they're furiously working on what does employee management look like in a remote era, because there'll be limited set of employees in office. So how do I make this work? It'll require a very different orientation in terms of engagement. If I'm a salesperson, how are you going to go out to the clients who actually don't even want to meet you? They're only going to talk to you remotely. So the trick about making that connect or making that sales pitch remotely to a client who's also learning how to operate online. Most of the clients are so used to having a physical meeting, especially when you sell high-end products. How do you kind of get them across the line? So these are important things for you to think about yourself as a product first and look at what are your USPs, which make you quite valuable for wherever you are working and wherever you may intend to work in the future. And I think doing that assessment will help you keep the stability and may actually help you tide this better. The second one, so product is one part of it, is how are you placing yourself within the organization that you're working and an organization of the future. So placement, or is in our career language, is called networking, which means you need to be networked rightly with the key influencers in the organization. So you have great skill sets, you have great value in your assessment. How do people know that you can actually do it? And make sure you have the right opportunity to actually contribute to the business agenda. So having the right placement, having the right opportunity is important. Third one is promotion. And I think that's an important bit, because what I find is sometimes people are very good, they network, but they're not able to promote themselves in a way that is meaningful. I don't mean marketing is always bad and it's not about your self brand, but ensuring that you're reaching out to an external stratosphere in the right way. One of the things I tend to do is, I have a lot of friends who are in headhunting firms. So, I tend to kind of be in touch with people more to know what's going on in the market. Rather, it's not always about looking for a job. And they do have this pulse about what's going on in the market. And I think, to me, that helps. And they're also able to plug you into places where, you may have a pro bono project, a pro bono mentoring, a pro bono session, like, somebody I knew who reached out to me from Future Generali and saying, could we have a discussion about this topic? So these things help. They also help you kind of build the brand. So I think focusing on some of this will kind of hold you in really, really good stead, especially at a time when the job scenario is uncertain. And then the last thing is, if you were to start zero based, what is the compensation price you would put on yourself? If you were hiring you, what would you pay yourself? And it's an important question that you need to assess, because your manager and your leader would be doing exactly the same thing and saying, what are my returns on this person? And is he or she performing enough? Am I getting value add? And is this enough? Otherwise, what I've seen is, during a transformational scenario, anybody who's seen to be very expensive, but the returns are not coming in, or the contribution not coming in, unfortunately gets into a list where you don't want to be. So those are the 4 P's that I kind of wanted to list out. Apart from that, I would say, watch out for industry trends. There's a report on, in fact, BCG has just published a report which is around which are the sectors which are healthy right now. And, some of them we talked about, like retail, and a lot of you are selling your products to these companies. So whether it's healthcare, retail, e-commerce retail, sorry, not the normal retail. These are sectors which will stay buoyant. Which are the pressured ones? Utilities, they are pressured. And some of the infrastructure companies, they are pressured. Which are the ones which are really underwater? I mean, I don't have to name. It's travel, it's hospitality, even the banks at this point of time. Because if you look at the quarterly results of the last quarter, most banks have taken heavy provisions for bad credits. And that's not good news. Which means at some point of time, liquidity will start to dry up. So those are trends which are very, very important to watch out, so that you know what is the reality out there in the market. It helps you follow through the 4 P's. If you are anytime in a tough situation, you know exactly what your strategy is going to be. But for a minute, I'm going to focus on when you are in an organization where you want to sustain your career. The 4 things in the past, when I was working with a bank, when I went through GFC, was a reality check about what's going on around you. It's good to be an optimist, but don't be blinded by things you can't see. So keep doing a reality check. It's not just financially how your firm is doing, but what your seniors are thinking. What's your management view on how things may be in the future? They're struggling too. But they are at that helm to give you a sense of where they want to take the company. So it's important to do that reality check, and it's important to know in that bubble where you stand in that reality check. Once you've done the reality check, reflect, and again I will reemphasize, reflect on what you are bringing to the table in that scenario, and then react. I'm not saying it negatively, but take action. Otherwise, things may strike you suddenly, and that may really be tough. I'm getting a few comments, here, and I'm looking through it. So not too many questions, but just comments. So I'll just wait for any questions if they come in. So those are 4 things which helped me in good stead. I'll just share the story in terms of what's going on in the market. So I've now started to work for a venture capital, and we actually fund a few startups. We look after early stage tech, emerging markets. So before COVID, as I say, BC, largely, time to market for a small tech firm was anything between 3 months to 6 months for a product for a mid-size kind of company. Today, that's been reduced to 15 days. So we just recently worked with a company which is making video consultation for doctors, and they were selling this product, or they were doing it for doctors in New Jersey in the US. And in India, like you do have Practo and you have my healthcare and all of that, US laws are much more stringent. So these are people based in India. There are 2 partners in India, 2 in the US. So they decided to make this app, and end-to-end 15 days app has been deployed, right? It's probably 75-80% ready. There are some bugs, but what it told me, and the multiple such examples, is that the era of perfection is gone. We don't have the luxury of time. So if it's relevant and it matters to people today, you have to move faster. If it's workable, it's as good as deployable. Time to market, nobody right now in the stratosphere talks about few months. Everybody talks about days and weeks in the way things are working. So when I'm doing a reality check and I'm applying those 4 hours to myself as I'm talking to you, I'm saying, okay, can we move this fast? We have to be agile. We have to accelerate. We have to adapt to the new realities. How do we do this? And what do I need more of? And second is, every time we get a new proposal to fund, we reflect in terms of what our core strategy is. Does it really fit into that? And there have been times where we've had to actually modify our strategy over weeks and days to make sure that we stay relevant as an investor. We haven't reacted, but we've acted to many of the demands or proposals that we are getting. And then, we've tried to reach out to a lot of small entrepreneurs who are probably struggling right now. So there are a couple of questions, and I'm going to pick up questions as we go along. So keep shooting them in, just trying to make this a little more interactive. What about the insurance scenario? This is from Amit Vig. What about the insurance scenario? Though I think it is an opportunity for us. Insurance, if Amit, you mean by the product, absolutely it's an opportunity, because people realize, especially if it's life, people realize the ephemeral substance of life, and India particularly has been underinsured for a while. So I think the market is there. The question is the focus that you can get from the clients right now. So it's certainly an opportunity for the sector. There's another question from Kanan which says, how do we upgrade ourselves in the current scenario? Look, I think it's a really good question, and there are various ways to do it. One is, there's a lot which is going on around, online learning. So, for example, when I got into a VC, I was, not so familiar with technology. And so I kind of enrolled into these Ivy League courses, which are free right now. They're really not free. For those of you who haven't logged in, let me tell you, edX will tell you it's free for 4 weeks and then you have to pay. But nevertheless, I've enrolled into one. I've enrolled into, we've recently launched Women in Technology, which is one of our big platforms to ensure that during COVID, the focus on a women agenda does not fall off, specifically with technology. So we're offering a lot of free courses there. So I've enrolled into those. So there is online learning and there's plenty of content available. So that's one way to do it. The second, which I highly encourage, Kanan, is reach out to smaller firms. They have plenty of projects going around. There is no better learning than doing a project or contributing to it, even if it is unpaid, because that's the best learning you can have. You're actually doing and learning at the same time. It's really worked for some of us who are in this firm, and I would highly encourage you. And if you need, then I can send you links of multiple firms who would be looking for pro bono project help as well. So those are two things which I would certainly recommend in current scenario. And given it's all virtual, you can do it from anywhere. So nobody's really wanting to, nobody wants to see you physically because they can't, but it's absolutely good to do virtual. There's another question here which says, hi, what do you think the future requirements of the field sales manager pertaining to B2B business? Would there be demand crisis? Well, Ash, I think field sales manager, it's a bit of a wait and watch game. I do believe, I've been talking to a few retail companies like, some of the big FMCGs, which you all might be working with, like a Levers or a Nestle. And the jobs will remain. It's not that they will eliminate, because there is a consumer need which exists, and that consumer needs to be fulfilled. So, the distribution need will remain. But I think they will get reshaped in the way you kind of interact with clients or B2B or distributors. In context like services, whether it's banks or insurance, it will go more online. When you're talking about a physical product, let's look at auto industry. I mean, it's a mess out there right now. Zero sales, right? Nobody wants to go to showrooms. So I think we'll have to think very innovatively, because I'm not sure how much of the virtual experience can happen. There's a really funny incident which comes to my mind about blended learning and pertaining to sales, and how much of training and sales can happen online and offline. So the biggest consumer for VR training is actually the aviation industry. It's the pilots, because pilots cannot get trained in live planes. So they do aviation and then they start to get trained on the planes. But imagine if you had a pilot who'd only done a VR training, or, had only a VR experience of the plane, no passengers would be really comfortable beyond a point flying that aircraft. So similarly, there will be things which will have to be done physically, and that will then have a downstream impact on what field sales managers would look like. So I don't see those jobs eliminating. I see them reducing. And will there be a demand crisis? Don't know, but there will be demand stress, is the way I would put it. Amit, I will share the link. There is one question which has come to me from LinkedIn. I'm going to pick up that. Does insurance industry survive after COVID-19? From Jenel. I would think so. I mean, life, oh, absolutely. So I think actually, one of the things which COVID is treating us or teaching us is the value of survival, is the value of life. I mean, I have 2 children, and God forbid, if something happens to me, I want them to be protected. And I'll tell you what, it can't be more real than today. So I think it's put everything in perspective. So it will not survive. I think if positioned rightly, it should thrive. Which industries are good to build career in light of COVID? Well, I can only share with you which industries are looking healthy. So it's when you say which is a good industry to make a career, it's also dependent on your personal choice. From a BCG report perspective, and it's available online, you guys can look at it. Healthier sectors are food, staples, retail. They're essential items. We're all going to eat. We're all going to do things. Can you get into a distribution business or you have like a e-commerce which is only doing food? All the food companies will thrive. Household products. We're all going to need household products. So companies like FMCGs which are focused on those products certainly will do well. Pharma. I don't have to say much more about pharma and healthcare as of date, because they will stay in business for a long time to come, because COVID is going to have a long tail even after it's gone. Telecom is another one. Technology is another one. Now, tech can be divided into different parts, but when I say tech, I really mean high-end tech of the future, not necessarily captives and KPOs. So when I look at India, captives and KPOs will need to rethink their strategy, because guess what? Now jobs can completely happen remotely, which means the per unit cost in the US or UK is going to be much cheaper. We do run the risk of, center shoring, which means jobs go back to those geographies, especially in a scenario where unemployment rates are going much higher in Europe and US. So watch out for that one. But tech and telecom, tech on the high end, telecom, food and beverages. So those are sectors and industries I think will be really good. Pressured sectors, we talked about a bit, like utilities, professional services, transport, tech hardware. materials. These are sectors which are really under pressure. The vulnerable ones, apart from retailing, travel, real estate, is going to be hugely vulnerable at this point of time, given most people will be reducing their footprint into office. Durable goods, media, and even the banks, because bad credits are going to go up. So those are some of the industries. I've just given you a sense of what I think will be good, bad, ugly. But it will also depend on what excites you. And the excitement could come in forms of roles in a certain industry. So for example, for me, I've been, hardcore banking for a while, and I really understand that industry. And I've really enjoyed it. I've lived through good and bad in financial services. I didn't run away from it because that's probably what I know best. But if I was to go back in my career 26 years back, and if somebody was to ask me, what would you do differently now? I would have actually done a variety of roles over my career. And so I decided to take that plunge now and try and do something different. There's a question, any suggestions for new MBA students? Well, I would say hang in there, okay? You are the new generation, and you are the generation, and you are going to be the leaders of the future. I think this COVID crisis is teaching you what no classroom can teach you. If you are passing out this year, I would say take something which will build your skill set. So, I was talking to some students in Plakshan, and my advice to them was work for cash-rich startups, okay? Because they are not under any bureaucracy right now. They're being really creative, like 15 days go to market. Will not happen in big companies because you have procedures. These guys are more agile. So that's one opportunity. There will be the sectors which I've spoken about. But I think, it's a fabulous opportunity because there is no downside of doing any job right now. And you've started just now. And I think this crisis will actually teach you so much more that you will really be able to navigate any other crisis in the future. But make sure you make those choices rightly. Very often we go after the big brands, and they're good. I mean, I work for 3 big brands and I've learned so much. But at this point of time, I would say take the opportunity where you think there is huge amount of learning and you can go and create something really quickly and have the satisfaction of doing it. On the live chat, there are a couple of more questions. So I am just going to start to pick them up. Okay, there's one question I've heard from one of my colleagues that financial sector will not recruit any further for 1.5 years. Will this really happen? No, Kaustubh, that won't happen. As I talk today, I mean, I can only talk from the experience of the platform that we're leading. You all are welcome to see womenintechnology.in. We have live mandates which are running from the banks. Remember, banks also have recasted themselves as fintech of the future, right? So they are all kind of out there, especially the big banks, because for them, this is the time to hire great talent. Lower price, great talent. I have the muscle to carry an excess workforce. So they will hire. But the question is, which jobs will they hire for? So will they hire a lot of retail bankers? Maybe not. Will they hire investment specialists? Maybe yes, because the market is so volatile. So somebody who has a real nose to understand which way the markets will go will be in demand. Will they hire in the corporate side? Will they hire traders? Absolutely. Because if you look at the bank's balance sheets of the big banks in India or overseas, large amount of their top line or profits have come in from the markets business, because markets business thrive on volatility. Will they hire a lot of M&A advisors? Maybe, maybe not. Because in a crisis time, a lot of companies start to come together, and that does require M&A expertise. Will they hire operations and technology? I do believe they will hire technology. I think they will resize operations, especially if it is simply operational process, which they are doing as a part of offshoring. So I don't believe the banks will not hire. And as I talk to you, the 2 banks, I know 2 big global MNC banks in India, which are hiring. It might be muted, not like yesterday when the numbers were like 100, 200. They may have reduced to 50 or 60, but we do have 50 or 60. So that's the good news. There's another question here for marketing activity on ground to go digital lead generation, how to make it up in the future. I think one is digital lead generation just requires different platforms. And there are some which work really well, but exploring different ways of reaching out to your clients through different platforms would be important. And so I would encourage that. How to make it up in the future? I would say future is actually going to get more digital. So the more focus you, especially when you're talking about marketing for retail kind of clients, that would be the focus. This is not to say newspaper, print, or TV will go out of out of fashion, but digital will lead the way on this one, purely because consumers, that scooter rickshaw guy now is on digital. Your low and middle class people, they're on digital, not just for TikTok, but they're buying things, they're doing e-commerce. I have staff in office, or I have staff at home who are all on digital right now, because that's the way to survive. So just bringing that back to your question, Vivian, I don't know exactly lead generation for which product, but I would bet heavily on digital, and that comes more as a VC than simply as HR. Moving in, there is another question which is around will data science job be in boon after COVID? Oh, absolutely, Krishna. I'll tell you what, I think, for one of our companies, we've been looking at data science engineers. We have, actually scouted for people. We just don't have the talent. And data science, actually, even before COVID, talent was actually very, very dry in the market. So these are some of the talent skill sets which will thrive. I do believe, I will take it a step further, given that there's so much happening remotely, and so long as we can handle data privacy laws across different geographies, you may have a lot of data science analytics kind of work, boundaryless, happening from anywhere. And so when I was talking about BPO, KPO, my point was, if it's operational work, there is a high likelihood developed markets will take it back to center. Because even if it is little money and their so-called their local population is willing to work for that much, they will take it back. There'll be political pressures around it. But talent like data science is not so easily available. So I do see spikes in people who have skill sets in data science, biotech, AI, ML. It's never enough for the industry. There's a question from Ash, which is, as the companies are really focusing on the cost, what do you think about the marketing activities, especially digital marketing activities for a company? So yeah, Ash, unfortunately, the companies are hugely focusing on the cost. There are a couple of things when we as selfish companies focus on cost. What do we start with? We first start with saying, travel band kar do, wo to band ho gaya. Then we say, acha, any conferences should be shut down. That is also being shut down. Then we look at marketing spend. And if we are little more midterm to long-term focus, we'll say, no, don't cut it down fully. Okay, but cut down what we don't need. There has to be some basic stuff for a product, whether we do it online or offline. But sensible companies will trim the budget, but not eliminate it. But there are 3 or 4 company boards that I'm sitting where there's a lot of pressure to eliminate marketing budget. It's almost like 6 mahine ke baad dekhenge, if we are yet in business, then we'll figure out if this needs to be, done. So I think marketing is going to be a tricky one. But in one place where you will get money is going to be digital marketing. 2 reasons. One, it's slightly cheaper. It's certainly cheaper to go and do a media buyout somewhere. And it's much faster, and my consumers are online. So if I were a marketing professional and I can convince the CEO that actually my return on this investment is much more at this point of time, I'm more likely to get that approved than otherwise. So I do believe digital marketing spend should stay. Even for some of our projects, that's one budget we are not eliminating at all. Because if you eliminate everything, how are we going to reach out to our clients? I mean, it's a very, very short-term view. Having said that, CEOs are very, very stressed right now. So everything is on the scanner, and everything is under the scanner with the lens saying, what is my return on investment? So justify that, and the likelihood is this should go through. The next question is, do you feel people will start buying more financial products now due to pandemic? Shaz, I don't know. I think they will start to buy. I would like to believe that they would buy insurance because, of what I said earlier, that suddenly that reality dawns in saying, this could happen to me. And so if this happens to me, what happens to my family? What happens to my children? What happens to my parents? So people are going to focus on insurance for sure. But frankly, with what's happened in the mutual fund market recently with Franklin and all of that, which am I going to buy mutual funds in a hurry? I think the confidence, consumer confidence, is a little low right now. I have friends and family who almost believe that there'll be more mutual funds going bust. So I think it's a tricky market for mutual funds, and we have to be a bit watchful. Credit card, not really. Spendy nahi hai, to credit card ka kya karenge abhi? Most of the credit card companies are putting in all the deals, but I'm not shopping. So there's nothing on credit card. Retail banking, I think right now, as investors or even as a consumer, when I look at what's the best way to keep my money is keep it where it is. Because their risk appetite is very, very low right now, and cash is king. So I do believe, right now from a retail perspective, financial products is going to be muted, right? There are things like gold bonds and all which are selling because why? Because people perceive it as safe. Honestly, when I saw there was a news article which says gold may go to 82,000 rupees per tola. It just blew my head off, and I sounded like my grandmother when I said, "Hey Bhagwan, मैंने तो ये 6,000 रुपए में खरीदा था." But it tells you about the sentiment of people that they only want safe stuff right now, and nothing matters than safety, both financial well-being and medical well-being of their family right now. There is currency depreciation going on, right? We are expecting INR to go to 80 versus a dollar. Pound is weak, so dollar is the only one holding up. So what are we going to do? And not a lay consumer on the market is not going to hedge in FX. So I think it's a muted market. The only industry I do believe will be okay will be insurance, probably. So those were some of my thoughts. And as questions are kind of pouring in, a few more, so let me pick that up. So there is a question around the whole, again, on the entry-level thing. I think this, has been coming up from different colleges and young people who just started their career, somebody asked about MBA student, their grad students, their kids in colleges right now who are just about to pass out. There are school-going kids who not had board exams. So there's a lot of stress in the education system as well. And the education sector per se is also struggling to cope up with online education. As I said, I have 2 children, but if I give them a choice to go back to school or college, they would go back in a heartbeat right now. Because for them, education is more blended. So education sector is another one to watch out in terms of how they manage this challenge. They have embraced the whole COVID crisis and taken it headlong. The reason I'm saying is, in some way, if you can contribute to the education sector, because they decide our future. They are teaching our future generation who will finally shape what your old age and my old age would look like. But that's another sector which has been under tremendous stress. So I've been kind of reaching out and, been reached out by a lot of institutions, and we're doing a lot of pro bono counseling. As I said, contribution, value add is far more important. Money is important and it will come. If you're good, the right job will find you. You don't have to find the right job. So I think, in life, life never gets easier. You get stronger as you face multiple challenges. God has a way of throwing challenges at you to test your mettle from time to time. I've seen good and bad during COVID time, and not that it is over, from what's going on around us in the gardens to pollution to infrastructure, all of that. But the fact is, we have to embrace the economic pain which is coming our way. And we don't want a situation where, less people are finally impacted by COVID, but more people are impacted by financial pain. So which requires proactive planning on part of companies, on part of employers, and also on part of employees. So, I do have, and I hope I'm not kind of sent behind bars and, suddenly I'm logged off this chat, but I was reading the Supreme Court judgment today, which has directed to the center saying MHA advise about, employees cannot restructure, or they have to pay full wages for the next, 3 or 4 months. And I really feel the pain of that statement from a point of view of employees and companies both. When I look at employees, it's great for them because at least for some time they are safe. But it's a false safety. Because when I look at the companies, and especially MSC and SME, they are bleeding, right? I mean, we were doing a session with some consulting companies where it was only for MSMEs. And one guy said, I just import clothes, I export clothes. And my whole business is far. I mean, zero revenue, zero P&L. I have 200 people. I have a factory. I will go bankrupt, right? So he's not being able to sustain, but because of a directive, he cannot do anything. I would rather that he would have reduced the wages, sustained everybody employment, sustained himself, and then rebuild the company. But the guy is going to be filing for bankruptcy, which means in 3 months' time, all 200 will not have a job. Now, my advice to those companies is, look, you've got to do what you've got to do. And obviously, we're not going to defy the government. But more importantly, there have been companies where employees have come voluntarily together and said, okay, let's figure out the right way of doing this. Because if the company, and this is largely for small, medium enterprises, if company sustains, we sustain. If the company goes bankrupt, we have gone bankrupt. So I know it's socialistic and I know India is emerging markets, but when I compare it to the US, and bear in mind, I've had that experience with global financial crisis, where US bounced off much faster than any other part of the world. Why did that happen? Because they are brutal when it comes to, pumping their economy. So US, by the way, has no such rules, right? So you can decide, depending on your financial woes, how you want to handle it. The problem is that when you push companies to do socialist work, it will backfire at some point of time. And which is why I kept saying, when this will happen, it'll be Q4. Because that's when, hopefully the COVID illness will be at, I'm hoping is ebbed. Economy at that point of time will be its lowest low. All the organizations will have to go back and resurrect if they're not allowed to do now. What do you think they will do? And I think you know the answer by yourself. So I would say, as employees, be proactive about what this means for you and what is your plan B if something was to go wrong. You have to be ready with plan B, because if you don't think about it for yourself, nobody else will. There's a question here which says, China is facing some ostracization from the whole world. Excuse me. How should we see this as an opportunity for Indian youth? Is Indian incorporation thinking about this opportunity and how we youth can be part of this? Yeah, you're right. I think China has got a lot of backlash in the way the whole COVID crisis panned out. And, there's a lot of reaction around that. It's a huge opportunity for India ecosystem. But I'll tell you what, for this to become a reality and for youth to participate, there are some regulations in this country which have to change. So, for example, getting equipment, getting goods from China is so much easier. I mean, I don't want to get into the detail. It's so much easier than trying to export goods from India to another country. So if we want to be the manufacturing hub for the world, which we, by the way, have a really good opportunity at this point of time, we have to ease in the laws, the regulation. So let me give you an example which hits home for me. My husband, he's the CEO for Bata. And so they make shoes, as most of you know. They also import a lot of stuff from China. It's cheaper, it's easier. There's a lot of manufacturing they do here. And actually, if they want, they can import or they can export this whole thing, or a lot of this production that they do in their factories here, in the Bata factories, to Europe and USA. But if they do that to Europe and USA, Indian regulation duties are so high that it becomes more costly for their European entity to manufacture in Europe. So it is a bit of a catch-22. So even the European entity of Bata will import from China because it's cheaper to do that. So what if they have large manufacturing plants in India who can do it at a much lesser unit price than China, but the duties kill them. So there are those realities which the regulators will have to look at. Is it a huge opportunity? Of course, it's an awesome opportunity. I mean, if you look at the other country which is really benefiting from the China backlash is Vietnam. Vietnam has got things under control. They're open for business. I have friends there who are playing golf right now. And so all the manufacturing, not all, I should say, but there is a clear gainer in Vietnam. They have the workforce, they're clean, they're doing what they have to do. So I think, this kind of transformation has to be thought through with the regulators, with youth like yourself, and it's a bit of a lobbying which happens with the government. And the way to do it, if you really want to move this ahead path, is to work with some of the big fours, right? I can put you in touch with some of the think tanks which are working on this, and and I wouldn't say pushing the government, because I think government is rightly caught up with all the current crisis, but starting to think with the government, saying how can we rebuild our economy, and this is one way to do it. So two very active big fours who are working in this space is EY and PwC. So if you want, we can connect you to those think tank. But I think just being part of the think tank, see how the lobbying works, is how I think you can start to add towards it. Because only if those needles move can action happen. I'm just looking in if... so I think just continuing on the thought of careers and what else may come up, I just believe that the opportunities are redundant, and keep yourself optimistic. There are different kinds of opportunities. It's not the standard, I work for a big brand like, you name it, Unilever, Citibank, blah, 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 and it tells on my resume. I think as a recruiter of tomorrow, what I would be looking on somebody's CV is, how did you use this time to create a transformational experience for yourself and for your company, or for whatever you might be doing as an entrepreneur? That to me will become a very big attribute to people we will hire in the future, because there is so much to be done. There's a question here, is working from home going to be the new norm post lockdown? Yes, Neha, I think working from home, pre-COVID, working from home in India was perceived with a bit of skepticism, both by, I would say, by the employer and also by the employee. So I have been privy to where I had teams working from home, but the work ethics which go in with working from home were not always practiced, which is why a lot of employees used to be cynical about employees working from home. But I do believe, I think the COVID crisis has put everything in perspective. So employees, like most employees I know, in their little teams will have a huddle every day in the morning. They'll have a huddle every day in the evening. So the work ethics and the discipline from working from home have changed. There are actually some of my team members or peers or colleagues have said, we work much harder actually now working from home than we ever have. So working from home will be the new normal, but it's difficult to predict right now what percentage of time or people will work from home. But it's certainly going to be more than what we have seen in the past. So SK Maidul says, hi. Anu Bhandari's question is, post-COVID-19, workplace will be transformed. What do you think will be the new skill set requirement at the job place? So Anu, it depends on which workplace as well. But if it's a generic question, I think we would look for people who are adaptable to different kind of roles, not necessarily bound by a boundary of a role. So, for example, willing to throw them in different areas, and are willing to learn and contribute very quickly, who are agile in their pace. The pace is going to change dramatically, and how fast we move. So, you won't have enough, you won't be moving with the old pace. So I think agility of learning and agility of moving will be important. And who can help the organization accelerate? To me, those are the attributes. I wouldn't say skill set. If you want to focus just on the skill set, I think one's core learning, which I would highly recommend to those of you, is get yourself abreast with new technologies. I would say it's a basic level knowledge you must have. And this is a good time to acquire it, because what we do in the future will have that underpinning. And, as I said, as we work with smaller entrepreneurs, we see that is very, very handy. So whether you're an insurance company, you're in a bank, you will have to think innovatively. You will have to think scale, which would imply that the platform you will use should be something which, you should be fully familiar with to recommend to your employer. Nabarun Basu's question is, what are the industries would face the hit due to crisis, and how can they bounce back when things get better? Industries I've kind of talked about. I've talked about, the retail, as in the malls, which we all love to go to, media, cinemas, anything which is crowded, which has a lot of human interface, travel, all these industries are going to be hit, and they will be hit for a while. The prediction is that they won't bounce back for at least 2 years. And for example, airline, right? So one of the questions I was asking somebody who works for airline, he's the CEO of one of the travel companies, is they will only be able to fly at 30 or 40% capacity, okay, because of the social distancing norms. So the travel will have a different meaning now with the fuel prices where they are. And some, if they get some bailout, they will be able to sustain. So I think it needs a more concerted plan. Every day in the news you see, yesterday Air France and KLM have reached out to the government for a bailout. Somebody is reaching out saying we have only 3 months cash to sustain. So I do believe government will have to sustain them at some point of time, but they will, sooner or later they are going to be given very strict norms of what travel is. So travel will come into play. Will they bounce back? Bounce back will take a little longer. The aviation industry, think about the planes, which I know a CEO of a part of Airbus. Their planes are lying in the hangar, nobody's picking them up. These are expensive goods. So I don't have real answers, but I would give hospitality, travel, malls at least 2 years. The rents will take a beating in the malls. The retail is getting more and more online. The stores will become multi-stores. So the ways of doing business and sales are certainly going to change on the industrial front. Next question from Abhishek is, what are the possible organizational cultural changes you see post-pandemic? I see a lot more engagement and less hierarchy, because I think COVID is a big leveler. If you think about it, it didn't worry about any privilege, rich, poor, sabko ho gaya, right? So it just transcended boundaries of all kinds. And it's been a very, very humbling experience. It didn't matter whether you are in China, India, or America, everybody's suffering. So I think it is a humbling experience, and what humbling experience do is they reduce bureaucracy and hierarchy. And so your traditional organization design of I'm a senior leader and you're a junior person will change, and you will see hopefully those behavioral change manifesting, because remotely working means there's high dependency on our engagement and connect. So collaboration will be a big one for organizations to make that work. And I see that not collaboration in the way it was done in the past where we talk about tools. I'm talking about real connects. It's having the touch points, being respectful, having a very clear demarcation about what do you do, what do I do, how do we make this work together. So collaboration, connect, how do we connect, stay connected given what we have just gone through, and we will come out of this big pandemic. And the third one, I would say, compassion towards each other. All of us are fighting a battle in some way. So let's be patient, because, as I talk to you, I have 3 friends in Spain. Each one has lost a family member. These are my friends from my previous organization. And it's very humbling, right? So, I can sit here in India and saying numbers are less, but those guys have been hit so hard. And I'm not going to go through their stories, but it is quite hard hitting home. So there's a lot of compassion which is needed in terms of, so collaboration, connect, compassion should be part of cultural changes, which you will see come about. Hi, Harshad. Then from Dr. Kamal, we have a question. What do you think about time management working from home? I'm really bad at it, Dr. Kamal. So when I'm working from home, I have 2 children. One is 21-year-old daughter who's just returned from the US before the shutters came down. And I have a 16-year-old son. So what I've done is, given that, we don't have right now any help or anything coming, I have beautifully divided work amongst the 4 of us, including my husband. So, whether it's domestic chores or professional work, we do our own stuff, but domestic is divided amongst all of us. I think I'm not a great one on time management. I will confess it's a development need. But I think you do need to do it. And I tend to do it through my Outlook. So I tend to put things in Outlook, like, for example, in the morning, I know some of you may laugh about it, but if I have to call my mother, I actually put it in my Outlook, because in the day-to-day humdrum of things, I may actually forget to check on the well-being of my parents who are very old. If I have to cook a meal and it's my turn to cook a meal, I have to put it because I otherwise might forget. So I kind of use simple Outlook tool for time management. It is very important because for most of us, we identify so closely with our work that it will tend to overtake anything else. And life is about balance. And as it is, we are working hard. Let's do it in the right way. Our family deserves more time and attention from us as well. So let's balance that out. I'm not saying balance is 50-50. You have to decide what is the right balance for you. But I'm just giving you what I do. But I think it's very, very important to make sure you're distributing your time rightly and not getting hogged off on one dimension, be it work or be it home. Then we have a question, one second, which is from Sarvesh Natkani. Can you please suggest some tips for freshers graduating from MBA colleges? Sarvesh, I already covered that, saying keep open-minded about the entrepreneurial opportunities. There are organizations which are hiring. It's not good, but it's not a complete write-off. Organizations do need a pipeline. And for big organization, what tends to happen is they will hire a batch. It might be smaller because they have to keep a pipeline going. Otherwise, a generation of MBAs will be missing. And that's not a good thing to happen. But at this point of time, go for jobs which value add, which develop your skill, SME, MSME, top tier corporates. And there are plenty available. It's not that the market is absolutely dry. Just have realistic expectations about compensation right now. And I'm quite certain you'll find the right opportunity. Ankush Bhanot, what should the government and also the private players and individuals do to take advantage of anti-China world is going through? Sure, there is a big opportunity. Yeah, I think, Ankush, we talked about it in response to another question where I did say, ease in the regulation. If you want to be the manufacturing hub, we yet need to ease regulation of import and export. That is the biggest hurdle right now for people to get stuff out of India. And if we can lobby, and which, as I said, some of the big fours are already doing, and they open up, without getting too worried about what it does to mom and pop shop, we have a great opportunity there. I think it has to be balanced. I'm not saying we open it fully, but there is a lot of regulatory work to be done on the customs, the fees, the surcharges, which are on import and exports. Dr. Kamal, many of employees don't have same facility like separate place, connection, etc. How should they manage working from home? So, Dr. Kamal Gautam, I assume if you're talking about people who are staying with other people, who may not have bandwidths. Couple of things which I would say is, even if you don't have separate places, most people have a machine or an iPad or a machine which could be simpler machine. So long as they have a machine, they could probably work in one part of that room. So I'm not sure what the separate place bit is. On connections and networks, there is an NGO we are working with, which works with government schools. Poor kids, they don't have phones. So online education is, by the way, for the privileged. What about those government school children? We're not just talking about employees who have no phones, who don't have laptops, who don't have a geo connection to study. So there is a lot of work going on right now to uplift that segment as well. So there are plenty of schemes right now which some of the telco companies are running with, where anybody who's kind of having connection problems and dongles are being provided. And one of the companies which is pretty active in the space is Jio. So again, I think, how should they manage working from home? Connectivity can be provided. All you need is a machine. If you're staying in a joint family with lots of people around you, I think you have to agree a certain way of operating with your family. So if I was staying in a one bedroom and I had like 5 people, I would probably, chart out my time in a balcony or, in a corner or, maybe, in just one side of a common area if I'm allowed to be there. It's a tough one. I can't answer that very clearly, but that's probably something I would do. And I do apologize because I don't think I've probably answered that as clearly as I would have liked to. Jyoti Kumar asks that, what are your thoughts about freelance work? Will companies engage more freelancers to reduce costs? Jyoti, yes and no. I think right now one of the cost-cutting measures has been reduce consultants. As I'm hearing from the companies, but I think as we go into the future, my sense is that trend is going to change, because they'll say, look, I don't need anybody in office. I only need people for a period of time, and Indian companies are coming off that age. So I would say it's not as good right now, because if you're not a core freelancer, return on investment, then companies are taking a really hard look on in the context of their cost scenario. But I do believe I see an increasing trend in the freelancers. So for example, again, I'll go to some practical example for the companies that we are funding. They will largely work with freelancers. They don't want to have overheads of permanent employees. They would rather have freelancers for 6 months and then renew the contract if need be. In a way, it is also less obligatory. So the SME will be very, very open to this model. I think the top tier corporates or MNCs will watch out, but I think the trend is very encouraging. So you should see more positive traction on that one. Then there is it the right time to invest in trading? I really don't know, Yogesh. I think I'm not an investment counselor, but I think I would just exercise caution. When it comes to some individuals' money, I'm very, very conservative. The markets are so volatile right now that it's very difficult to look into any crystal ball and gaze. I would probably say stay safe with debt bonds. Put in government bonds, gold bonds, debt bonds. Those would be my recommendations, but I'm not a trader. But I would say exercise caution for sure. What about internship in a firm for an MBA graduate? Anu, plenty out there, plenty. And, I keep getting these Facebook requests where people say, oh, certain companies have withdrawn their internship. Let me give you a practical example. So I felt really bad. I'm from XLRI. So, some companies withdrew their internships. So I actually offered 4 internships in our startup companies. Nobody turned up. And these are paid internships. So there are plenty out there. And I suspect they didn't turn up because they got a good offer somewhere else. And that's okay. I didn't take that personally. But there are plenty of internships, so long as you're willing to do the right kind of work. So I don't think internships are easier to get right now than permanent jobs. Ruchi asks, I'm a MCA, left my job when conceived. What would be the best option for me, as I have to look after my baby? I'm thinking to join as a school teacher, but confused as I have 0. Ruchi, there is no right or wrong option, right? I think you have to, in the new world, actually, there will be so much of remote working and flex from home that unless schooling is your first love or first choice, I would encourage you to explore much more. You are a MCA, right? And, we have very few women who are MCAs. So I was just mentioning, we have just launched this big platform called Women in Tech, technology.in. Have a look at that. There are about 7 jobs which can let you work from home. So use your education wisely. But if you yet intend to go to school and to teach, that's fine. I mean, do an online course right now and acquire some learning before you get back to school. It's like doing any other new job, which you have no experience or no learning of. But the fact that you're an MCA gives me a sense that you have reasonable amount of education to acquire skill sets of teaching, and you certainly will do a really good job of it. There's a question around, can we expect recession again in finance industry? I don't know. Look, we're going into a recessionary market anyways, as we know, right? Everything is looking held up, prices are down. Will it be only in the finance industry? No. Recession is going to have a bigger impact across industry. Will finance industry be hit? Of course, it will be hit because a lot of companies will not pay back their loans. The balance sheet will, go a little bit underwater. But when we talk about recession, which is on the back of COVID, it is much larger than the financial industry. And every industry is bracing about how to deal with it. As I said, I've gone through classification of which are the sectors which will hold good, which will not. But so long as they're able to deal with it rightly, who knows, we might be able to beat the recessionary impact, and let's keep our fingers crossed on that one. Abhishek's question is, how are life insurance companies planning to adopt to this new normal? Do you think customers will be more receptive towards telecom, meetings, video conferences, the sales required to deal with it? Well, if your question is new normal in terms of selling, I'm reasonable. I mean, all companies, not just insurance, are now getting into telecoms or videos, right? I mean, those of you, somebody asked me a question about trading. So if you want to buy Zoom stock, that's the one you should buy. And now, not after the security breaches. But I think that's going to be the order of the day, because people will be scared to meet people in person. And I think the sales skills will be important from a point of view is, how do you sell things online? We haven't done this like hugely. So if some of you remember, there are those TV programs where they show you products, and then there's this happy person who will come and say, look, I tried this and it's good. You have to start thinking creatively, because those guys are yet selling, because they sell through TV, and then you can punch in a number, make a call. There are delivery companies which are yet delivering. There is the Amazons and there is the Flipkart. So I think that's the retail side of it. I got carried away a bit. But I think telecom meetings, video conferencing, the sales force will have to equip themselves with a new way of selling, because sales force will be needed. It will be the new way of what the consumer wants, and you will have to be guided with that. So I think I'm reasonably confident, companies like Future Generali, and I know some of their seniors very well, especially the CEO. They're very, very future looking in a real way, true to the company name, and they would be thinking through some of these future strategies, because that's what your consumer behavior is going to be. Somebody's asked a daughter question, Yogesh, in giving 10 exam. Too early, Yogesh. I don't think you need to worry about your daughter. She's doing 10th. In 2 years, by the time she passes out, we hope the world will be a much better place. So I wouldn't think you need to worry about it right now. I would say focus on her exam and make sure she does well, in current times. How feasible, this is from Sonam Singh, how feasible would it be to go for higher studies abroad or in India? How effective are online courses? How feasible? I think it'll be very feasible, because for two reasons. One is the classes are empty right now. Second is, the courses abroad are very expensive for foreign students. So it is a source of revenue for foreign universities. So getting admissions right now in foreign universities would be easier. In US, Trump has put a stop to some of the immigration visas, but I think visas related to students or learning will not be that impacted. How effective are online courses? Actually, from my experience, the online courses are very, very effective. I've kind of been doing these free, as I said, Ivy League courses, very good content. The thing is, what I miss in the online courses sometimes is just that interaction and that discussion, and they try and make that happen. So what I tend to do is, once I've done a course, I talk to my colleagues about it. But the content is fabulous. They're very good for tech skills, or they're very good for any kind of subject matter skills. So you want to do tech, you want to do finance, you want to do HR. But I personally find that when we do about soft skills like coaching, I like to have that bit of a human interface, because it is a much more emotional training or course that you have to go through. And I believe that right now we do not have machines or AI to the level that they have been able to interpret the human mind. They're not as smart. But for technical skills on any subject matter, online courses are very good. It is like reading a book in a little more interactive way. So go for it. And studies abroad will actually be a little easier in the coming year. Okay, thank you, Parth, for your appreciation. Appreciated. There's a question from Natalia, which says, how do I run my garments business? I do lots of customized stuff. Good question, Natalia. I wish I had an answer. So I'm going to give you my views rather than give you an answer. I think you need to see what is going to be the wardrobe of the future. I was doing a session around future of work, and this came up saying, what clothes do I wear to office? My whole wardrobe is not being used. So people are sitting with excess clothes. And if the future is going to be remote, what comfort clothing do we need as consumers? And it might be worthwhile, because I haven't seen anything in this space. So as consumer, what do I need? I don't maybe need all that suit and ties and formal clothing, because when I'm working from home, yes, I have to look proper when I'm having these kind of conversation, but do I have to look completely formal unless and until I go for a client call? Maybe not. So I think, again, study your consumers about what they need in terms of garments and wardrobes, and that may help you with more ideation. And that, because you do a lot of customized stuff, may be very helpful. My sense is, especially in garments, comfort will take over style, but that's my personal view. Ash, what kind of shortlisting and recruiting criteria will the HR people would be considering post-COVID? One of the things I talked about, Ash, which will be, how did you utilize this time, right? Just doing what you are doing will not be good enough. So, for example, do some social work. There are a lot of people hungry out there. Do some, good for the larger cause. So I would encourage that. I would look at people who stepped out of their boundary at this point of time to see how they could help the society at large. And even in their current jobs, what did they do different, which made a real meaningful change for their organization? So those are the questions I would ask you if I was in the panel, depending on what you are doing. So if you are a marketing person, I'll say, okay, well, what did you change, right? And if you are able to give me an answer that actually, yes, we were under pressure on the budget, but this is how I handled the discussion, and this is how I was able to sustain the budget, that will be a fab, asset. And I'm sure that'll be very positive for the panel. So it will depend on how you handled it. But I think some of the questions would relate to problem solving, right? How do you take problem solving? And also, what is your future orientation, where the world is unknown to most of us, right? But you've got to have a view about what future may hold, and that view cannot be a feeling. It has to be grounded in data. So keep close to research which is coming out. I do that because I don't always have the answer, but I read a lot of papers. And some of these papers are, were good 2 weeks back, and you'll be surprised what one big four has presented. The second big four will, will give a contrarian view. So it's a good tic tac to see, and it helps you shape your thinking. So have a grounded view. When I say future orientation, your view about the future, and hence what is your recommendation to solve a problem of the future. So those will be things we will be looking at. It won't be simply a leadership competency model. I think that will be secondary. Do you think, Sachin asks, do you think hiring online will increase instead of face-to-face interviews? Yes, Sachin, I do believe that will happen. I do believe that conversations like this will become part of the way we do hiring. So long as I can see you, I can experience you. And by the way, online hiring was happening pre-COVID also. But I think the frequency of this will increase dramatically. And by the way, because I can have you virtually based in any part of the world, work will be offline, work will be virtual, and hiring will be virtual as well. So I do feel that there'll be an uptake on that one. Ria Kalra, I'm into decoration and event planning. Since we have used Max Chinese products and for events, I needed sponsors. I feel both sectors are badly hit. Do you think it will recover, and in how much time? Oh, well, event planning has certainly been hit really, really badly because of just the nature of the events, which is lots of people coming together, which is obviously not going to be in the future. So I think one of the things which people are doing now is doing online events. I have friends who are doing that, online conferences. So start thinking about what an online event looks like. And not everybody has an expertise in organizing an online event, Ria. At best, most people think, kind of organizing an online event is going to house party and inviting friends for drinks to do it virtually. But maybe there are ways to do online events which we haven't even thought of. How do you make sure that I look differently in an online event, the surroundings look differently in an online event? So I think you have to start thinking creatively, and you have to start thinking of virtual events rather than physical events. If the market come back, will it come back? I think it will come back, but it will take a little longer than some of the other products. And when it comes back, it will be sparse. But I do believe, why I say it will come back is because as humans, we are social. If you read Homo sapiens, we love to spend time with each other. There is no substitute for having that drink with my friend in my favorite cafe. So whatever I may do online, it doesn't substitute that. So I do believe, if I had a choice to do an online party versus offline, certainly offline. Okay, because if you look at event planning, people can dress up, they can chit chat, they can have their drink. There's that sense of physical sensation, which is very, very important. So I do feel strongly it will recover, but I also believe it will be a blend of online and physical event planning. So those are things you might want to consider from a short-term perspective as well. Kaustubh's question is, in this time period, I want to do a project on sales and marketing, pursuing PGDVM on this domain. So where will I get as well as for? So Kaustubh, happy to help. I can connect you to a few people. If you ping me on LinkedIn, would be happy to connect you to a couple of people who may be willing to explore that with you. So hopefully I have kind of picked up most of the question. Ashish, I am going to call on you. I am sorry, I am just over by 15 minutes, but I'm going to call in Ashish, who is the anchor and really the force behind these sessions. But before that, I wanted to thank you all for being a lovely audience. I think this has been really interactive. You've pushed me to think on beyond my own boundaries on a lot of questions that you've put to me. As I said, if somebody's question hasn't been answered or you have any lead-up questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm pretty active and I'll be happy to interact there. So Ashish, over to you.
Thank you, Anu. I think this has been a very, very good session, and I learned a lot about in this session. There are some more questions, Anu, if you want to take, I think a couple of questions which are there, which are just pinged you on the chat. If you can just have a look.
I can take the question, Ashish, but I can't hear you really well. So do you want to just send it on the chat?
Yeah, I have sent you those questions on the private chat. If you see that, just click on.
Yeah, so I've taken a question from Jenel, Dhananjay, and Monali. I've taken those 3 questions from the chat.
You did not get any questions after that?
No.
Okay, so I will read them out. So Meenakshi Sen Gupta has asked, do you think working from home will become a reality? For a section of white-collar workers, do you think that could help more women to enter the workforce?
So, we already answered saying working from home will be a reality. I think there will be a balance. Popularly, I've started saying for as far as women are concerned, it's sometimes women working from home or women from home, whichever way we want to put it. But that will be a reality. But all I want to emphasize and re-emphasize is that working from home is working from home. And those are things which require a lot of planning, discipline, and ethics. But this is going to be for extended period of time for white collar, and in some cases even for blue collar. Actually, I'm not talking about manufacturing plants, but for service industries where you don't need to always have a physical places. There will be places where blue collar will have to be in office, like banks or branches, and where there is a regulatory need, or there are factories which are running. But it's very much the reality. Where I see the industry going is having maybe, every industry is a little cautious, but largely I think the pendulum will be somewhere in between, where till yesterday we had 10% or less than 10% employees working from home. It's certainly going to swell up to 30, 35, and probably come to 50 or 60 over the next 2 to 3 years. The point is that employers have also found that working from home can actually work. And I think that has encouraged them, saying, actually, we can take a punt. It makes business case for them, because if they have more productive employees at home, they have less real estate cost. So they are looking at it also from that point of view, which is why I believe this is very sustainable.
I think, Anu, I just scrolled through all the questions, and I think we have already covered most of them.
Okay.
Thanks a bunch for taking out time and giving us the guidance. I think everybody would have been benefited a lot from this guidance, and this just for everybody's notice that this video will remain on our social channels. So whether it is YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So if anybody has joined late or you want to refer back, please use the video. Yeah. Thank you, Anu.
So
Final word.
one little point is that working from home has its perils. As you saw, two of my kids just pinged by and pinged in. So these are little things which happen, which reminded me of the BBC video, where if those of you who haven't seen it, what working from home means, it's basically shut the room where you're working so nobody can get in. Because in the BBC video, the guy is doing a chat and his little 4-year-old walks in and the camera keeps rolling. Right,
Yeah,
so he doesn't know there is a child dancing in the background. It's one of the most watched YouTube video. So I had a
yeah.
bit of that star feeling when two of my children were roaming around here. So apologies about that, but hopefully they were not much of a hindrance.
No, not at all. In fact, I didn't even notice you were so. I was so engrossed in what you were saying that I didn't even notice till the time you called it out. I will have to go back and check. Yeah. Uh,
Okay.
thank you, Anu. Thank you. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.